Mr. Ajit Doval is concerned, and soon after India has been taking up this entire inquiry. But having said that, that's not been the case with Canada. India has been very vocal that Canada ought to have followed up through diplomatic channels, something they in fact did by pressurizing the Indian High Commissioner and intensively engaging the High Commissioner over the last year. They choose to now target him, not even provide him adequate security, so much so that India has had to withdraw the High Commissioner along with other diplomats in Canada. That goes on to, in fact, indicate the kind of approach that Canada has taken. The RCMP in its press conference was very scant in the evidence. They were making accusations, but they had no solid, concrete evidence to back those claims up. Apart from that, we've also seen there's been a lot of there's a lot of chatter in the media, but there should have been proper diplomatic back channel talks, and secret information ought to be shared through bilateral channels and not publicly as Canada is doing. So I think it is Canada's approach which ought to be questioned, not India.
Right, Akanksha, thank you so much for bringing in all those details. Well, US is clearly prioritizing the diplomatic relations over accountability. Let's hear out what the US State Department actually had to say.
The timing of those was completely coincidental. When it comes to the Canadian matter, we have made clear that the allegations are extremely serious and they need to be taken seriously, and we wanted to see the government of India cooperate with Canada in its investigation. Obviously, they have not chosen that path.
Diplomatic tensions that are escalating. Now, as these diplomatic tensions continue to escalate, US State Department has now said that matter of Canada is serious, and what we expect India is to cooperate with the Canada. So these are the latest inputs that we're tracking.
Hello, namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The India-Canada row remains our top focus. Justin Trudeau has chosen war and offered no proof of the charges that he's made against India. Now he's trying to rally support from his Western allies who've all issued statements but refused to sour their relationship with India to serve Trudeau's purpose. Meanwhile, the Canadian press and some leaders in his own party are hauling Trudeau over the coals for supporting Khalistanis. We'll tell you how his plan is backfiring and how the West will pay the price for its terror hypocrisy, like it has done in the past. It disregards India's warnings and concerns and suffers the consequences. Also, will this diplomatic war impact trade ties between India and Canada? Who stands to lose more? We'll discuss all of that. In other news, S. Jaishankar is back from Pakistan. He started the day with a morning walk and wrapped up with some straight talk at the SCO. A report on the multi-bomb threats and how they have caused panic among Indian airlines, why the US has threatened to stop military aid to Israel, Episode 2 of the Netanyahu-Macron war of words, how billionaires are funding Donald Trump's election campaign and how it compares to that of Kamala Harris, why trust in the media is eroding and who is to blame for it, and companies do not want to hire Gen Z because they're too entitled and easily offended. We'll examine the findings of a new survey. The headlines first. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky unveils his long-awaited victory plan, rejecting any territorial concessions to Russia, calling for more support from the West, including an invitation to join NATO. The Kremlin says Zelensky's plan is futile. Russia has seized around a fifth of Ukraine's territory since its invasion in 2022. Will China review Intel products sold in the country? A Chinese Cybersecurity Association recommends it, says Intel products threaten China's national interests. Semiconductor giant Intel is based in California. For months now, China and the US have been locked in a tit-for-tat tech battle. A fuel tanker explosion in northern Nigeria kills more than 100 people. Dozens more were injured. Many of the victims were trying to collect the fuel which spilled on the road. Nigeria is battling its worst economic crisis in years, making fuel a precious commodity in Africa's most populous nation. Switzerland's highest court backtracks on a controversial rape ruling. A year ago, it had referred to a sexual assault case as, and I'm quoting, a rape of short duration. This had triggered widespread outrage in the country. The court now says the duration of the assault cannot be a factor in sentencing. And in India, heavy rains lashed parts of Tamil Nadu. Chennai faces severe waterlogging and transport disruptions. Schools and colleges shut as the state government declares a public holiday. The Met Department predicts more showers over the next 2 days. Justin Trudeau is under pressure. 2 days ago, he went after Indian diplomats, accusing them of crimes like extortion and murder without proof. This triggered a full-blown diplomatic standoff. India downgraded its relationship with Canada. It expelled Canadian diplomats and recalled 6 Indian diplomats, including India's High Commissioner to Canada. More importantly, India rejected all the charges levelled by Canada. So Trudeau started a diplomatic knife fight, but it's not going the way he'd planned. He's not being able to make the charges stick. He's leaning on his Western friends for support, the likes of the United States and the UK, all of whom have weighed in on the matter, saying more or less the same thing. Basically, the West is advising India to work with the Canadians to investigate the allegations made by Ottawa.
We wanted to see the government of India cooperate with Canada in its investigation. Obviously, they have not chosen that path.
That was the US State Department. The UK said pretty much the same thing, that India should cooperate with, and I'm quoting, Canada's legal process. London says that that's the right next step. So this is basically Trudeau's new game plan. Seek support from his friends, get a few statements issued and build pressure on India. He has given this task to his foreign minister. Her name is Melanie Joly. She's reaching out to the Five Eyes. It's basically a group of intelligence sharing, the Five Eyes. As the name suggests, the Five Eyes Alliance has 5 members. Canada is one of them. The others are Australia, New Zealand, the US and the UK. Now, the Canadian minister has sought their help. She wants to rally support for Canada. And the Five Eyes have stepped up, but so far their support is lukewarm. Canada wanted a sweeping condemnation of India. They even made calls for economic sanctions. Yesterday, Foreign Minister Joly had dropped a hint. She said, and I'm quoting, everything is on the table. But Trudeau's friends in the Five Eyes appear hesitant. They seem unwilling to risk their ties with India for Trudeau's political gains. This includes Canada's most important ally, the United States. Despite this row and the divisions between New Delhi and Ottawa, the US has called India a strong partner.
India continues to be an incredibly strong partner of the United States. We work with them on a number of matters, including our shared vision for a free, open, prosperous Indo-Pacific. And when we have concerns, we have the kind of relationship where we can take those concerns to them and have very frank, candid conversations about those concerns.
This is from the same State Department briefing. Washington is sending some important messages here. First of all, there is no change in the India-US relationship. Washington is not reassessing ties with New Delhi. They will continue to work together on bilateral and multilateral issues. That's point number 1. Second, when there is a problem, when differences do arise, both India and the US are willing to sit across the table, have an honest and open dialogue and find solutions together. That is essentially the signal from America, and it's the sign of a mature relationship. And the other Five Eye members are taking the same line. Yesterday, Trudeau himself called London. He spoke with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK. Trudeau briefed Starmer about the allegations against India. And what was Starmer's response? His office released a statement. It's on your screen right now. Look carefully. There is no mention of India or the statements made by Trudeau in public. It simply says that both leaders discussed recent developments regarding allegations under investigation in India. It's a pretty vague statement. Australia has taken a similar approach. Canberra's statement makes no mention of India. The Australian Prime Minister was asked about this. The Prime Minister is Anthony Albanese, and he gave a generic response. Albanese did not address the issue directly. He was asked if he had spoken to Trudeau. And listen to the response. He said, "I speak with the Prime Minister of Canada all the time." So no commitment of support, no criticism of India. Finally, we have New Zealand. Its Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters spoke on the matter. He said Canada has briefed the New Zealand government. Once again, there was no reference to India. In fact, Peters added a caveat. He said if Canada's charges are proven, then it would be a matter of concern. So all of the Five Eyes members, except Canada, of course, are treading with caution. Trudeau may have hoped for more, to get his allies to condemn India. Instead, he ended up highlighting his own shortcomings, limitations, and immaturity. Trudeau's allegations have united India, whether it's political parties or social media or commentators. But over in Canada, it's quite the opposite. Justin Trudeau is facing a lot of flack. Some Canadian media outlets are questioning his strategy. Even his own party men want him to quit. Look at the National Post. It's an English newspaper based in Toronto. Listen to what their op-ed says. I'm quoting, "Trudeau has allowed diaspora politics to unduly influence foreign policy, pledging that Sikh values are Canadian values at events and failing to crack down on suspected Khalistani extremists living in Canada." Quite an indictment there. It's exactly what the government of India has been saying, vote bank politics and shielding extremists. And it's not just one report. Here's another Canadian journalist. He says Trudeau has failed to give evidence that he's stuck in the trust me bro phase. Trust me bro phase, it's a new social media term. People use it when someone makes outlandish claims, and that too baseless ones. Now, Trudeau may not have any evidence, but there is evidence against him. And you wouldn't believe the source. Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, the head of Sikhs for Justice, a banned Khalistani terrorist group. Pannu went on Canadian television and he made a damning revelation. He said he's been talking to Trudeau's office for nearly 3 years. Listen to this.
Sikhs for Justice have been communicating with the Prime Minister office for the last 2 to 3 years, detailing all the spy network.
How about that? Pannu just admitted a direct link between himself and Trudeau, between a banned terrorist group and the Prime Minister of Canada. Is this not supporting Khalistani separatism? Or is this also a freedom of expression issue? And speaking of Trudeau's Khalistani friends, Jagmeet Singh is also facing heat. He leads Canada's New Democratic Party. On Tuesday, he held a press conference. He called for sanctions on Indian diplomats, only to be laughed off by reporters. Take a look at this.
We all need to be unified as Canadian leaders. All of us have to be united in denouncing Modi and making sure we protect Canadians and put their safety first and foremost. Thank you.
Not saying whether or not you have personal threats. What do you make of Indian that you're leaving open that assumption?
We're gonna let her. Yeah, he's gone.
He's gone. Also, that's still not how it works. Yeah. We can't just go online.
This timing may look pretty bad because Trudeau is already facing a party rebellion. He leads the Liberal Party. They have lost key by-elections in Canada, so some party leaders want a change in leadership. Reports say 20 members of parliament are on board. They have signed a letter asking Justin Trudeau to step aside to get in new blood. And now the Canadian media is on his case. So it may look like bad timing, but perhaps that is the idea. Just think about it. What's the more interesting story? Liberal backbenchers trying to oust Trudeau or an international diplomatic scandal? The answer is obvious. Trudeau has managed to shift the focus from himself to India. We saw that during his press conference. Reporters asked him about the party rebellion. Look at how he shut them down.
There will be time to talk about internal party intrigue at another moment. But right now, this government, and indeed all parliamentarians, should be focused on standing up for Canada's sovereignty, standing against interference, and looking to be there to support Canadians in this difficult moment.
In the short run, this may work. Perhaps the headlines will shift, but one fight with India will not fix Justin Trudeau's problems. Just look at the opinion polls. The opposition Conservative Party is at 42%. Trudeau's Liberals are at 23%. Now, opinion polls can go wrong. But a 20% difference rarely does, which is why the opposition is being cautious. They are not lining up behind Trudeau. They know what the strategy is, to portray Justin Trudeau as some sort of savior, as the defender of Canadian citizens. And the opposition is not falling for that trap, especially Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He's pretty active on social media, but on this issue, he did not issue a statement directly. Instead, he posted a statement via his party. Plus no press conferences either, no calls for sanctions or punitive actions. So Trudeau's plan appears to be backfiring. If anything, Canadians are learning more about Khalistani gangs, about what they stand for, what their past is, and what their goal is. It's clearly not what Justin Trudeau expected. He thought Canadians would close ranks behind him. Instead, they're asking questions like, where is your evidence? What will be the cost of your standoff with India? It's very different to the situation here because while India is protecting its sovereignty and territorial integrity, Trudeau is fighting for his political survival. For India, this is not new. We've always been victims of terrorism. We've flagged it multiple times. We've pointed fingers at the puppet masters, but the West has always ignored it. I have some examples for you, none bigger than Pakistan, of course. After the 9/11 attack, America launched the war on terror. They roved in Pakistan to fight alongside them. Back then, India warned Washington. Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh said, the problem cannot be the solution. Meaning, Pakistan is the source of terrorism, therefore it cannot be the solution. That's what India told the Americans. The Americans, of course, ignored India's warnings. They gave Pakistan tons of military support. A decade later, the US managed to kill 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden. Where? Inside that same Pakistan. Even today, it's the same situation. India has been calling out Pakistan's terror campaigns, but the West doesn't care. Donald Trump briefly cut off the military aid, but Joe Biden resumed it. Another example is Afghanistan. In 2010, Kabul hosted a peace conference. The Indian foreign minister attended it. Listen to his warning back then. This is from 2010. The international community must learn lessons from past experiences at negotiating with fundamentalist and extremist organizations. Adequate capacity of the Afghan security forces is necessary for protecting Afghanistan's sovereignty. Gains of the last 9 years stand to be squandered if this aspect does not receive the attention that it deserves. This was India's warning in 2010. And what did the West do? Exactly the opposite. First, they negotiated with the Taliban, then they left in a hurry, which means Afghan security forces were not prepared. As a result, India's prediction came true. The gains of 2 decades were squandered almost overnight. A third example is Khalistan. By the 1980s, India had started warning Western countries. In 1982, New Delhi took up the issue with Canada specifically. Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, was Prime Minister then. He decided to ignore the issue. In fact, India had also asked Canada to extradite a Khalistani suspect, a man named Talvinder Singh Parmar. Again, Canada rejected it. The same man went on to mastermind the Kanishk bombing. He blew up an Air India flight in 1985. 329 people were killed in that attack. More than 260 of them were Canadians. Do you see the trend here? India keeps warning the West about terror threats. The West keeps ignoring them. And finally, India is proven right. What explains this Western ignorance? Well, the Cold War may have played a role. India was not aligned with the West during that time. It was much closer to the Soviet Union. Maybe that explains the Western indifference to India's concerns. It explains, but not justifies. Because it wasn't just ignoring concerns. Sometimes the West has also worked against India's interests. The best example is the Taliban in Afghanistan. The US funded and armed these radicalized fighters. And India paid the price for it. The Taliban helped Pakistani terrorists launch attacks in Kashmir. Nearly 40% of the deaths, 40% of the deaths happened in that period from 1996 to 2001 when the Taliban ruled Kabul. Same in Sri Lanka. The Tamil Tiger groups, the Tamil terror groups, got most of their funding from the West, from countries like Switzerland and the UK. These countries were home to a large Tamil diaspora. That's where the funding came from. Again, who paid the price for it? Ordinary Sri Lankans, yes, but India was also dragged into the conflict. So my point is quite simple. Do not dismiss India's terror concerns. Do not ignore the red flags, because this is not a case of the boy crying wolf. India has always been measured and realistic in its demand. Even with Canada, New Delhi did try its best. It was only on Monday that the language and the tone sharpened. So ignore India's concerns at your own peril. So India and Canada are on a war path. Will trade be caught in the crossfire? Ottawa was asked this question, and it said that it will be business as usual, that economic relations will not be affected. But in this current environment, is that even possible? How big is the India-Canada bilateral trade? Which items are likely to be affected? Could this escalate into a trade war? And which economy will suffer more in the event of a trade war? Our next report tells you.
India-Canada relations are at an all-time low. There have been harsh statements, diplomats have been expelled, there's no sign of resolution. So what's next? Will all of this impact more than just political ties? Will it impact bilateral trade? Canada says that it's unlikely. Its international trade minister is trying to reassure Canadian businesses, especially those with ties to India. Mary Ng issued a statement talking about the uncertainty. She said the government will continue to support economic ties between the two countries. So Canada says trade won't be affected. It will be business as usual. But if things do get bad, what's on the line? To understand that, let's look at India and Canada's trade relationship. The bilateral trade is worth around $8 billion. That's less than 1% of India's total global trade. Since 2017, India has increased exports to Canada. The trade deficit was $2 billion then, and now it's down to $0.7 billion. What about foreign investment? In 20 years, Canada has invested $3.6 billion in India. That's around 0.5% of India's total FDI. Over 600 Canadian companies and organizations have a presence in India. So trade isn't as significant. But there are a few crucial items. First on the list is pulses. India buys a lot of lentils from Canada. In fact, 25% of India's pulse import is just from Canada. This year it was worth around $930 million. So pulses are important. After all, they are a staple here in India. But it's not just New Delhi that will be hurt if there's a trade war. Canada will feel the pinch too. Its farmers produce 1.5 million tons of lentils, and India buys a major bulk of that. Another important item on the list is potash. It's a very important fertilizer. In 2022, India signed a deal with Canada to import potash. Under this, New Delhi would buy 1.5 million tons of potash. And it's crucial because India imports a total of 4 million tons of potash every year. So Canada provides a significant chunk of that. This was a 3-year agreement. It hasn't been affected by this diplomatic crisis. Other imports include asbestos, copper, minerals and industrial chemicals. So that's the imports. And what does India export to Canada? Well, it's a mix of items. These are the top 5. Pharma products, organic chemicals, iron and steel, gems and jewelry and electricals. In 2022, both India and Canada even explored the idea of a free trade agreement. Talks began in the month of March. They continued until July 2023. There were as many as 9 rounds of talks. Things were looking good until the Canadian Prime Minister accused India. India has since called off those talks. It's unlikely to resume them anytime soon. In the current situation, Canada has more to lose if things go south. Now Ottawa says trade won't be affected, But political standoffs inevitably affect trade ties. There may be no official bans or restrictions, but traders remain wary. Businesses want to steer away from trouble and seek safer options. In the case of India and Canada, things will be no different.
Diplomatic tensions that are escalating. Now, as these diplomatic tensions continue to escalate, US State Department has now said that matter of Canada is serious and what we expect India is to cooperate with the Canada. So these are the latest inputs that we're tracking from the ground, and we're getting a reaction from the United States where it is expected out of India to cooperate with Canada on basis of these allegations. Now, remember, the diplomatic row between India and Canada has escalated following allegations from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that India may be involved in the assassination of a Canadian Sikh leader. Now, this accusation has led to mutual expulsion of diplomats and heightened tensions in both the countries as both the nations grapple with issues related to national security, human rights and the diaspora. So these are the latest inputs that we are tracking from the ground at this point of time. Now, joining us on the broadcast is our colleague Akanksha. A very good morning, Akanksha. How can the United States actually justify its calls for cooperation when it has not directly addressed the serious implications of Canada's allegations against India also?
A very good morning to you, Kohina, and our viewers. And that is precisely also the point that India has been making, that, our requests for extradition, the kind of various gangsters over there, many of them also branded as terrorists. Apart from that, the anti-Hindu graffiti, the kind of defacing of Hindu temples that's taking place, the defacing of the idol of Mahatma Gandhi, all of these requests which have been made by the MEA for investigation by the Canadian authorities have in fact been left unheard. Now, what Matthew Miller, the spokesperson for the US State Department, has said is that they have made a very serious note of everything that's happening as far as the downgrading of the diplomatic ties between Ottawa and New Delhi is concerned. What is very surprising and misplaced is the comment that's come in that they wanted to see the government of India cooperate with Canada and its investigation, but India has chosen an alternate path. So the US State Department often makes remarks which are off the cuff. They are misplaced and lopsided even at the moment, because remember, the Ministry of External Affairs has been very vocal about how not even a shred of evidence has been provided with Canada, and that New Delhi is very much willing to cooperate, as it is already doing so in the investigation of the alleged Pannu murder plot, who is also a US citizen. Remember, this entire news of the downgrading of diplomatic ties arrived on a day when we've seen an inquiry committee from India traveling to the United States. In fact, an official has been arrested by India in this entire plot. So we all know that action arrived soon after the US State Department spokespersons met earlier during this year, as far as Mr. Jake Sullivan and the NSA, Indian NSA, Mr. Ajit Doval is concerned. And soon after, India has been taking up this entire inquiry. But having said that, that's not been the case with Canada. India has been very vocal that Canada ought to have followed up through diplomatic channels, something they in fact did by pressurizing the Indian High Commissioner and intensively engaging the High Commissioner over the last year. They choose to now target him, not even provide him adequate security, so much so that India has had to withdraw the High Commissioner along with other diplomats in Canada. That goes on to, in fact, indicate the kind of approach that Canada has taken. The RCMP in its press conference was very scant in the evidence. They were making accusations, but they had no solid, concrete evidence to back those claims up. Apart from that, we've also seen there's been a lot of there's a lot of chatter in the media, but there should have been proper diplomatic back channel talks, and secret information ought to be shared through bilateral channels and not publicly as Canada is doing. So I think it is Canada's approach which ought to be questioned, not India's.
Right, Akanksha, thank you so much for bringing in all those details. Well, US is clearly prioritizing the diplomatic relations over accountability. Let's hear out what the US State Department actually had to say.
Let us use this opportunity to exchange ideas,
Now let's turn our attention to Pakistan. The country just finished hosting the SCO summit. SCO stands for Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's a Russia and China-led bloc with 10 member countries from Asia. Pakistan is one of them, and it was chosen to host this year's summit. By the looks of it, they pulled it off. No explosions, no terror attacks, no murder sprees of any kind. So Islamabad does deserve some credit for managing the bare basics. It was no mean feat. Pakistan deployed 12,000 security personnel to maintain law and order. They also shut down all shops and businesses. It was inconvenient for the locals, but the Pakistani establishment accomplished its main goal, pulling off an incident-free SCO summit. It must have been a relief for the attendees, which included some high-profile figures. You had the guest of honor, China's Premier Li Qiang. Pakistan was especially keen on showing him a good time. We'll get to the reason in a moment. Also in attendance was Russia's Prime Minister, Mikhail Mishustin. And from Central Asia, you had the Prime Ministers of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And the Prime Ministers of Belarus and Mongolia were also present, as I said, profile guest list. India's Prime Minister was also invited, but Prime Minister Modi chose not to attend. Instead, he sent External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who arrived in Rawalpindi yesterday. It was the first visit by an Indian minister since 2015. He attended the SCO banquet last night, where he met Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. This morning, Jaishankar began his day with a morning walk at the High Commission campus in Islamabad. India has a diplomatic mission in Pakistan's capital, and Jaishankar interacted with his colleagues there. He even planted a tree on the campus as part of the Indian government's tree plantation campaign. After that, he went to the main SCO venue. He took part in the photo op, stood for the family photo, got the pleasantries out of the way, and then got down to business, the main SCO summit. Now, before I get into the details, here are some things that you should know. The SCO began as a regional grouping to promote trade and security. Its main goal is, and I'm quoting, strengthening mutual trust and friendship and good neighborliness. I'm not joking. It's in the SCO charter. The bloc initially comprised Russia, China and some Central Asian nations. It gradually expanded to include India and Pakistan in 2017. Then Iran came in 2023 and Belarus joined this year. Right now, the SCO claims to represent 40% of the world's population and about 30% of the world's GDP. China is one of the founding members. It wants to bolster the grouping further, turn it into an anti-Western bloc. Most of the other members are just keen on development. They want to use the SCO to set up infrastructure and trade, like Pakistan.
like the Belt and Road Initiative of President Xi Jinping, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is in its second phase, and the International North-South Transport Corridor should be expanded, focusing on developing road, rail, and digital infrastructure.
Now, Pakistan calling for expanding infrastructure sounds like a good idea until you think about the money. Who exactly will pay for all of that? Well, you remember how I called the Chinese premier the guest of honor. This is the reason. Li Qiang was given the royal treatment. He met the who's who of Pakistan's establishment. He even ended up inaugurating an airport. And then during the summit, Shehbaz Sharif said And I'm quoting, Pakistan supports the establishment of an SCO, Alternative Development Funding Mechanism, which could provide the impetus needed for the revival of stalled development projects. Basically, Pakistan just asked for a new loan, or rather a new bank to regularly take loans from. Let's see how China responds to that. And Shehbaz Sharif did not stop there. He had another zinger lined up.
The international community must step forward with urgent humanitarian support while calling upon the Afghan interim government to embrace political inclusivity, thereby ensuring Afghan soil is not misused for terrorism against its neighbors.
Yes, you heard that right. Shehbaz Sharif has a problem with terrorism, with terror being used against neighbors. Perhaps he should head on to nearby Rawalpindi and convey this to Pakistan's military establishment. It's a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black. Islamabad is fine with terrorism when it is used against India, but terror from Afghanistan is an urgent matter for the SCO. Talk about hypocrisy. Now remember, Jaishankar was at this meeting. He had to sit through this whole charade. But then he delivered his address and it summarized India's point of view. Jaishankar said, and I'm quoting, if trust is lacking or cooperation inadequate, if friendship has fallen short and good neighborliness is missing somewhere, there are surely reasons to introspect and causes to address. If activities across borders are characterized by terrorism, extremism and separatism, they are hardly likely to encourage trade, energy flows, connectivity and people-to-people exchanges in parallel. The message was quite simple. The speeches at the SCO mean very little, honestly, if the member states don't adhere to the group's charter, if they don't behave like good neighbors. India's neighbors are China and Pakistan. One tries to capture territory, the other tries and keeps sending terrorists. Until these transgressions stop, India won't be very enthusiastic about the SCO. "12 bomb threats in 72 hours. I repeat that for you. Over the past 72 hours, 12 Indian flights have received bomb threats, including Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet and Akasa Air. The threats were posted on social media. They caused widespread panic, long delays and diversions. But later, all the bomb threats were found to be hoaxes. So who was behind this and why? Here's a report.
Over the past 72 hours, at least 12 Indian flights have received bomb threats. The threats were posted on social media with flight numbers and flight names. Who were the victims? Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet and Akasa Air flights. The threats came in all shapes and sizes, from 6 kilos of RDX on a flight to time bombs about to detonate to terrorists on board. Later, all the threats were found to be hoaxes, but the damage was already done. The threats sparked widespread panic for Indian Airlines, for hundreds of people on the flights, for governments both in India and globally. They led to long delays and diversions. On Monday, after the threats were posted, 3 international flights that took off from Mumbai were diverted or delayed. But the trouble was far from over. On Tuesday, 7 flights were delayed. An Air India plane from Delhi to Chicago had to land at a Canadian airport. Later, another Air India flight, this time from Madurai to Singapore, received a bomb threat. So Singapore scrambled its fighter jets to escort the plane away from populated areas. And today, 2 more threats were made to an Indigo flight from Mumbai to Delhi and an Akasa Air flight from Delhi to Bengaluru. While people everywhere are breathing a sigh of relief knowing that the threats were fake, the question remains, who caused this pandemonium? There are no clear answers yet. Authorities are investigating the threats. They are trying to identify the people behind them and considering legal action, including placing those responsible on a no-fly list. That is, once they've zeroed in on the suspects. So far, the list includes only one individual, a teenager. He's been detained in connection with the threats made on Monday. The accused is a 17-year-old boy, a Class 11 student from the state of Chhattisgarh. He allegedly posted the threat messages on the social media platform X in an attempt to implicate a 31-year-old man with whom the boy has a history of disputes. This includes a financial issue involving 3 lakh rupees and a sexual assault case. So according to the initial investigation, this could have been the motive behind the hoax messages posted to target the man. So currently, the 17-year-old and his father are under investigation. But the main question is, what triggered the sudden surge of threats this week? And can only one person be behind this? While the probe is underway, security at airports has been increased. So has security on flights, with additional sky marshals. After all, when airlines receive bomb threats, they set in motion a range of steps, from the involvement of bomb disposal squads, sniffer dogs, ambulances, police, and international agencies. With international flights being targeted, other countries have also gotten involved, including Singapore and Canada, who are pursuing their own investigations into the case. So while the threats may have been fake, they have led to thousands of dollars in damages to both airlines and security agencies through delays and detours. So these bomb threat hoaxes will be investigated with all seriousness to ensure that our skies remain safe.
Our next story is about the war in West Asia. Israel has been at war for more than a year now. It started with the October 7th Hamas attack and the subsequent war on Gaza. The war escalated last month. It expanded into Lebanon, with Israel now fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel bombed Beirut again today, that's Lebanon's capital. Israel targeted the suburbs in southern Beirut and it leveled multiple buildings in the area. Israel also launched an airstrike on Nabateh, a major town in southern Lebanon. The Israeli strike hit Nabateh's municipal headquarters. At least 6 people were killed, including the town's mayor. Meanwhile, Hezbollah launched a barrage of rockets at northern Israel. They fired around 30 rockets. Most were intercepted, but at least one hit the ground and injured 4 people. Now, while Israel is busy fighting in Lebanon, it hasn't forgotten about Gaza. It is conducting an operation in northern Gaza as well, but a problem has cropped up. Israel is starting to face pushback from its chief ally, the United States. On Sunday, the US sent Israel a letter threatening to cut military aid. Yes, you heard that right. Israel's biggest backer has threatened to stop sending weapons unless Israel eases the pressure on Gaza. Washington's chief concern is aid flowing into Gaza. As you know, Gaza is under siege. Israel controls almost all routes in and out of Gaza. This means that Israel also controls anything that goes in, including humanitarian aid. Now, Israel has squeezed aid in the past, but in April they eased the pressure. They started allowing 300 to 400 trucks of aid to enter the enclave every day. But that number has been falling because of a new customs law that Israel brought in. This law allows Israel to stop relief supplies from entering Gaza, and because of that, the aid flowing in is about half of what it was a few months ago. The US is not happy about this. They want at least 350 trucks of relief supplies to enter Gaza every day. And that is what they demanded in the letter. Washington has issued an ultimatum. If the aid does not flow within 30 days, the US might cut military aid to Israel. And this may not be a bluff. The US can do it. It's written into their law. Any country receiving American weapons during a war has an obligation. It must not hinder the US from delivering aid. That's what the law says. So technically, Israel is violating American law by stopping aid shipments. And that means that the US is legally required to stop sending them weapons. All of this was mentioned in Sunday's letter, which was signed by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. So Israel is taking it seriously. Its military released this video today, the Israeli military, purportedly showing aid trucks entering Gaza. Again, this was released by the Israeli military, so it seems that the US threat worked. But why do you think that is? After all, Israel has happily ignored the US in the past. US President Joe Biden drew multiple red lines. He told Netanyahu to not invade Rafah, to not escalate the war, to not invade Lebanon. Netanyahu was playing hopscotch with Biden's red lines. Why then is Israel suddenly paying heed to an American threat? Well, because it's not just America anymore. All of Israel's Western allies are upset with Netanyahu, and they're all contemplating punitive action. Let's start with France. Netanyahu is in a war of words with the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Macron had called for the end of weapon shipments to Israel last week. This was over Israel's actions in Lebanon. Obviously, Netanyahu was not amused. He called Macron's statement a disgrace. This spat has now escalated. Yesterday, Macron held a meeting with his ministers. It was a closed-door meeting, but one of the attendees leaked Macron's statement. He apparently said that Netanyahu should not ignore decisions from the United Nations. He added, and I quote, "Mr. Netanyahu must not forget that his country was created by a UN decision." This is a reference to a UN General Assembly vote in 1947, which ended the British mandate of Palestine and created the modern state of Israel. Netanyahu was furious when he heard about Macron's barb. He responded by saying, and I'm quoting again, a reminder to the President of France. It was not the UN resolution that established the State of Israel, but rather the victory achieved in the War of Independence with the blood of heroic fighters, many of whom were Holocaust survivors, including from the Vichy regime in France. That's a sharp rebuke and an insult. Netanyahu reminded Macron that some French people bent the knee to the Nazis and helped Hitler kill Jewish people. Netanyahu is not conceding to Macron. But how long can he keep defying the West? Today, the UK decided to pile on the pressure.
And Israel must take all possible steps to avoid civilian casualties, to allow aid into Gaza in much greater volume, and provide the UN and humanitarian partners the ability to operate effectively. Mr. Speaker, along with France, the UK will convene an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council to address this.
Britain seems to be following America's lead, and they're backing France to boot. It seems like a coordinated effort. The West is squeezing Israel together. They want Netanyahu to increase aid to Gaza and back away from Lebanon. Netanyahu's options are limited. He needs Western weapons to continue the war. That explains the fresh aid to Gaza. But will he listen to the West when it comes to Lebanon and Hezbollah? Judging by today's airstrikes, that's highly unlikely. Money and elections, they go hand in hand, and it's the case everywhere in the world, including in the US. The campaigning is in the last stretch, and looks like Donald Trump has gotten some last-minute cash boost. It came from his BFF, Elon Musk, and two other billionaires. They've poured $220 million into the Trump campaign in the last 3 months. But will that be enough to match Kamala Harris? Since July, her campaign has raised more than $1 billion, and they're still raising funds. The more important question, perhaps, is, will money give Harris an edge in swing states? And can Trump's billionaire friends help him bridge the gap? Our next report explores.
Elections are an expensive affair. You need money for basically everything. In the US, there are restrictions on how much money a candidate can receive. You can't contribute millions directly. But there's a way around it. PACs or political action committees. You can put money in a PAC and in turn use that money to influence an election. On Tuesday, America PAC submitted its filings. It's a pro-Trump super PAC that was formed this summer. In the last 3 months, it has gotten $75 million in donations. And all of this money came from one person, Elon Musk.
Take over, Elon, just take over.
He donated $15 million in July, $30 million in August, and another $30 million in September. In fact, he is the PAC's only donor. Well, it helps having the world's richest person in your corner. But Musk isn't alone. 2 other billionaires have funneled millions to support the Trump campaign. They are businesswoman Miriam Adelson and packaging magnate Richard Uihlein. Together, Musk, Adelson and Uline have donated $220 million in just 3 months. So billionaires are backing Trump in this last stretch. That's good news for the Republican presidential nominee. After all, he's up against a better-funded rival. I'm talking about Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. Her campaign has raised $1 billion since July. No presidential candidate has ever raised so much money so fast. Where did that money come from? Well, a mix of sources. Yes, there have been big money donors, PACs, and also ordinary voters. In fact, her fundraising committee raised $633 million in the third quarter of 2024. The Trump campaign got around $160 million during the same time. So basically, Harris raised 4 times that amount. But her campaign doesn't want to get complacent. They fear the cash may dry up in the last stretch, so fundraising events continue as usual. The Harris campaign believes it's essential for the last few weeks. So what is this money being used for? Well, for everything, from door-to-door campaigning to an advertising blitz. Take Elon Musk's Super PAC, for example. It launched a massive campaign in the swing states. These are the states that will decide who gets the White House, and the most crucial among them is Pennsylvania. So the America PAC is on the ground there. It spent $57 million on canvassing and field operations. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign has pre-booked $370 million worth of ads. This is both on television and online. They have also spent $11 million on Facebook and Instagram ads, mostly targeting the 7 swing states. The campaign even invested thousands of dollars on bracelets, these Harris Waltz friendship bracelets. If the elections were determined by just spending, we all know who would win. But that's not how it works. The Harris campaign may be swimming in cash, and it gives them an edge. But money alone cannot win the US presidential elections.
Diplomatic tensions that are escalating. Now, as these diplomatic tensions continue to escalate, US State Department has now said that matter of Canada is serious, and what we expect India is to cooperate with the Canada. So these are the latest inputs that we're tracking from the ground, and we're getting a reaction from the United States, where it is expected out of India to cooperate with Canada on basis of these allegations. Now, remember, the diplomatic row between India and Canada has escalated following allegations from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that India may be involved in the assassination of a Canadian Sikh leader. Now, this accusation has led to mutual expulsion of diplomats and heightened tensions in both the countries as both the nations grapple with issues related to national security, human rights and the diaspora. So these are the latest inputs that we are tracking from the ground at this point of time. Now, joining us on the broadcast is our colleague Akanksha. A very good morning, Akanksha. How can the United States actually justify its calls for cooperation when it has not directly addressed the serious implications of Canada's allegations against